I shared a tweet recently that was talking about what I think one of the most toxic ideas that we encounter is. And that idea is that the world is divided between good people and bad people. The reason for which this idea is toxic is quite simply that it results in severe amounts of pollution in our life for a few simple reasons. First of all, this idea is very normative. Normative simply means that we're imposing a certain norm, a certain idea of what is good, what is bad, what constitutes a good person, or what constitutes a bad person. As you might know if you read some of my articles, instead of talking about good people and bad people, I prefer to talk about behaviors, healthy behaviors and toxic behaviors. There are a few reasons for this. One is that behaviors matter. So if someone is, let's say, allegedly a bad person or a toxic person, but behaves in a way that is healthy, de facto, they are a healthy person. And if someone is supposed to be a good person or a healthy person, but they behave in toxic ways, de facto, they are a bad person. And they're a toxic person because of the behaviors. And this is exactly why it's a very unhelpful idea. As soon as someone cloaks themselves as being a good person, they basically excuse any behavior that they have that is toxic as saying, well, I'm a good person, therefore you should tolerate my behavior. If we think that some people are good people, we'll find excuses for toxic behavior. So it really makes it difficult for us to see the behavior for what it is, to see the results for what they are, and then we find excuses. Because this person is a good person, therefore I have to find excuses for all of their behavior, however toxic it might be. So we can do that, but the end result is that if we do that, we get abused, and we encourage abuse with others. Because if anyone points out the toxic behaviors, our reflex is to say, well, this is a good person, therefore you shouldn't criticize them because you are criticizing a good person, even if the behavior happens to be toxic, and then we find excuses for it, or we suffer from cognitive dissonance and we minimize the behavior. We want to defend the person. It basically reinforces tribalism. And tribalism is the, antithesis of humanity, of civilization, which is all about overcoming tribalism, working together despite any differences we have, because fundamentally we're all human, so we have much more in common than we have that separates us of all the important things. Oops, I see that a young human over there just fell over, hurt themselves, so I'll walk in the opposite direction to spare you the cries. So back to this idea about good people, bad people, toxic behaviors or healthy behaviors. Multiple people like using this idea of good people and bad people because it feels tribalistic, so it feels familiar. We don't need to think because we just categorize people as being good or bad. And then we don't have to observe the behavior because we put up with the behavior of good people and we shun people that we have decided are bad. Any kind of nuance that gets brought into this, be it in personal relationships, be it when talking about, intimate relationships, work relationships, as we see increasingly politics. So anyone who brings in any form of nuance basically gets shunned because it's making us feel very, very uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, what we ought to be wanting, for once I talk about ought, what we ought to be wanting is for people to be happy and healthy and safe and autonomous and able to manage themselves. And the best way to do this is to help people identify toxic behaviors and healthy behaviors. Now, it's one thing to be caught in this thinking of good people or bad people. It's very seductive. I mean, it's overly simplistic, and it sort of taps into the idea of the good and bad, good versus evil. And with the tribalism, actually, when thinking of it, the number of children's stories where the two gangs of children, and of course the main protagonists are absolutely sure that they are the good ones and the others are the bad ones, But of course, from the other kid's point of view, they are the good ones and the protagonists are the bad ones, simply because they randomly get caught in whatever tribe or group they think they belong to. So being able to step away from this and just observe means that maybe some of the people that we feel are part of our tribe don't act in a healthy way. Maybe it's members of our family. Maybe it's our partners, our colleagues. And part of becoming an adult is specifically no longer delegating to other people the responsibility for filtering the information and deciding for us. And it's highly possible that someone that we do dearly love, who is fundamentally, quote unquote, a good person, has one or multiple forms of toxic behavior. I mean, the opposite would be surprising. To meet someone who never has any form of toxic behavior, that would be really strange. So if we're able to identify the behavior, we are able to identify specific things that can be improved and talk about it. And it's not doing someone a favor to pretend that everything they do is perfect, because otherwise how will they improve? And indeed, each of you and myself, we sometimes do things that are toxic for someone, and then the person can point it out to us and we can think about it. Maybe indeed we made a mistake, we can apologize. Maybe actually it really works for us, and then we shouldn't spend that much time together. And maybe the other person is simply trying to impose on us what they want. So being able to walk away if there's a mismatch is really important. Deciding that we have to adapt to other people is unhealthy. Making other people adapt to us is unhealthy, because maybe it just doesn't work. And this is very important to bear in mind. So I strongly recommend that you think about this and look at any set of ideas that you embrace, that you've used, that divides people into groups that are good or bad. Look at those ideas, because those probably are toxic ideas. And toxic ideas often get hidden behind, how would I put it? They insert themselves in Trojan horses. I've seen this quite a bit, strangely, with the non-profit sector. So people often think if it's non-profit, they're after something more noble than profit. They want to do good. But when we see how they function, I've seen multiple organizations that first of all, do far more harm than good, that have bloated overheads, bloated expenses, that fund people's so-called careers and ego trips, that claim to help certain groups of people, and in effect actually do much, much worse, whilst funding the lifestyle of quite often Westerners who want to enjoy very, very, very well-paid vacations. But if we think of them as being good people, then we don't criticize it. We don't look at what the outcomes are supposed to be. We don't think, for every $100 that are spent, what is the best way to get the best outcome? Or the optimal way to get the biggest outcome for the people we want to help? Because we don't ask those questions, because these are good people after all. And so we want to support good people and we don't like bad people. But this whole notion of good and bad is specifically there to avoid us asking the real questions, which is, are we reaching the goals? And what is the goal? The goal of anybody wanting to give money to help other people should be to maximize the impact for the people that they claim to want to help, and not simply subsidize the lifestyle of the people who believe that they can achieve that impact. In the same way, the goal of looking to interpret people's behavior and shield ourselves from toxic people, the goal ought to be to see the world accurately. And seeing the world as divided between good people and bad people is not accurate. It does not help people make good decisions. It does not reflect the idea that every single person on earth believes that they are somehow fair and justified. And even even the worst possible people, murderers and other people who've done horrible acts, when people dig, they usually find out that they believe there's some great injustice, and they are rebalancing this injustice. The world is unfair. They are entitled to be bad and evil in order to rebalance, in order to get revenge. That's one of the reasons why we should be very, very careful of anyone who is resentful, because they are trying to take revenge on the world, and they will stop usually at nearly nothing. To take revenge, they won't be bothered about using other people, because their goal is not to help people. Their goal is to take revenge. So anyone dividing the world between good people and bad people is trying to manipulate others, consciously or unconsciously. That is completely irrelevant. Consciously or unconsciously, they try to manipulate them. They try to impose a worldview that serves their purpose and doesn't help anyone else. So remember this. Well, that's my recommendation. Look at behaviors. Don't try to label people. In the same way, when I don't like talking about narcissists. I sometimes do it because it's more simple. People understand it better. But fundamentally, I don't like doing it because it's not a matter of is the person a narcissist or not. Otherwise, you end up just debating that. The question is, does the person's behaviors work for me or not? If they don't, they don't. And that's the end of it. And if they do, and that's great. And that's all that matters. So focus on what is really relevant. Focus on what helps us see more clearly, think more clearly. And the main thing there is behaviors, not just debating labels. There we go. Thank you for listening. And I wish you a pleasant day, pleasant summer.